What's going on, everybody? Welcome to For the Millie here for Monday Night Football. Back from the Phillies game last night, got the outcome that I wanted, and a pretty decent day in both DFS and on Pick 6 for me as well. TwoGun, how was your Sunday? I know you had a pretty good Sunday night.
I did have Sunday, afternoon, morning was disappointing considering how much Chase, we talked about Chase. It was your slate breaker. I had him in like 45% of my lineups, and I basically lost 50% because of the damn Tucker Kraft chalk and the Denver Broncos chalk. And so lots of people had similar lineups, where you had the Joe Burrow stack with Chase and Higgins, or I had a Lamar Jackson with Zay Flowers and Jamar Chase greenback. On my Joe Burrow stack, I also even had Likely, which ended up being great, called GPP scores. Shout out. But the GPP scores, when the damn chalk tight end gets 4 catches, but one of them's for a gigantic touchdown, the other's for a touchdown, it just sucks. I don't know what to say. But then, I threw in 2 lineups into the luxury box and other Showdown, and I went to sleep at half, and boom, $100,000. So can't complain.
Beautiful. It's funny you mention that because I think, throughout the course of an NFL season, there are only going to be so many times where you make a call like Jamar Chase slate breaker and you get the absolutely massive game. So the fact that we got that call right on a week where a lot of the chalk hit in a big way, like also think of the Joe Flacco stacks with Josh Downs, think of Brian Thomas Jr. on the bring back there. A little bit unfortunate, but hopefully we can still get some big wins coming up. And we've had a lot. That's now 4 $100,000 wins for the community. Gunny, by the way, prop is on a different show, 7 o'clock. So everybody should check that out as well. He's been doing an awesome job with live betting too on these island games. Just been so much fun following all that. But maybe we'll have to get prop on one of these DFS shows one time and just kind of teach him the DFS ropes, because I know he's plenty sharp to have just as much success in these streets. Let's go Phillies. Indeed, Eric. Always love seeing how many Philly fans there are just everywhere in the Discord. It's a lot of fun to be a Philly fan right now. Hopefully they can close out this series sooner than later. But TwoGun, let's talk a little bit about your winning lineup. Why don't you first tell us about the lineup? I would love to share it, but I'm here in a new apartment and I'm surviving right now in a hotspot, so I don't want to do too much on the screen and risk losing connection. So just tell us a little bit about your lineup. What were the stands that you made? Who was your captain, and how did it play?
Let me bring it back up, because I'm already my mind's already in this new slate. Okay, let me see. And can I share? Let's see. Can I share my thing? I think I can.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Okay, here we go. Let's see if old Boomer TwoGun can figure this out. All right.
I feel like something's about to break, and I'm gonna have to save the stream.
Oh, for sure. Okay. Let's see. Let's go. Okay. So this is my lineup. I looked at Sam's article, and I always look at our articles.
Hey, TwoGun, real quick. Can you blow that up? If you're on a Mac, hit Command and the plus sign a bunch of times.
I'm not. I'm on a.
You might be able to do it with Control and the plus sign. I don't know.
Control and a plus sign. Right? Can TwoGun figure out how to do this? Probably not. Oh my God, I did it! Holy cow, look at me go! Look at me go! Look at me go! Look at me go! One more time. All right.
Look at that.
All right. Wow, look at me go. Okay. So the first thing I did is I always look at y'all's Showdown article, and I mainly look at I always look at our materials, our ownership projections, and our captain optimals. One thing I will say is people always generally use the running back way too much in captain. That's kind of what our stuff says. And my thought process with this Showdown was, I'm just going to pay Najee Harris because he's going to be popular. And a way to fade him is basically saying that this game shoots out some, which it didn't really shoot out, but it shot out enough.
Yeah.
Which just goes to show you, when you take the kind of wham kickers defense, it's still hard to win, because a touchdown or two really or a bonus can just give you so many more points than a random than a random, a random kicker. Like, look at my other lineup, right? This is my loser lineup, and it didn't have Najee Harris, and he had Brett Aubrey, and he had all these other random dudes, and there's just only so much you can get from kickers and stuff like that. So
Do you think that your lineup would have won if Aubrey didn't have a field goal blocked?
I don't know. I didn't even watch half the game. I went to sleep at halftime. Okay, so it's generally more when you're going for more of a shootout is when you want more of a balanced lineup, right? And especially if you're fading a kicker or fading a running. And I noticed in the article it talked about how Dak is more optimal than people are going to stack him. So I want Dak as the captain. And he basically has 3 pass catchers. He has Ferguson, Tolbert, and obviously CeeDee Lamb.
Mm-hmm.
And since I'm going, CeeDee Lamb's just so damn expensive, and he's going to get so much ownership that I went with Tolbert and Ferguson, which basically allowed me to stack Justin Fields with 2 of his pass catchers. I liked Van Jefferson going into this game because I'm an idiot and I just love Van Jefferson. The dude just runs wind sprints, but hey, he got 5.6. And Freiermuth, I guess I got lucky because he got a touchdown because I didn't see that part of the game because I was asleep. So it's a very simple stack. It's very simple. It's just quarterback, 2 pass catchers on both teams. Incredibly simple. But people get so distracted with the kickers, the defense, and the running back chalk that sometimes simple is all you need to do because this is not a very popular build. The guy solo took it down. Whereas we can scroll down and you see how 2 people tied for third, 3 people tied for fifth. And you can see, obviously, they have Najee Harris chalk, incredibly popular. And then they just kind of use other guys. And they, some people try to, dumpster dive with these random Cowboys. And I guess it worked with Turpin. He's, definitely produced. But this just kind of goes to show sometimes if you just fade this running back chalk, that's all. And it's not so much that you need Harris to just be terrible. He got 77 yards and 2 catches, but without a touchdown, if other guys are able to produce more, he suddenly will often not be optimal. So
yeah, it's also really interesting that you didn't include both CeeDee Lamb and Pickens, where you're kind of telling a story that they have success through the air in part because the defenses are taking away the primary option and leaving those other guys in really winnable matchups. And so I like the fact that yet again, like we're looking at a winning showdown lineup that told a pretty clear and concise story. So I think that's probably the big lesson to take into tonight's. It's the same lesson that we always talk about here with Showdown. Just make sure that your lineup is telling a story. It doesn't have to be this exact story, right? Like and in fact, I would almost say it's probably going to be tough to make this exact story work because we have 2 teams tonight that have very, very concentrated production on their offense. On the Kansas City side, it's basically Kareem Hunt at the running back position, and then Xavier Worthy and Travis Kelce, and then a bunch of other kind of peripheral guys. And then on the New Orleans side, it's Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, and Rashid Shaheed, and then a bunch of peripheral guys, one of which we're going to talk about a lot because we have the same opinion about one of the peripheral guys on the New Orleans side that we'll get to. But how are you approaching tonight's Showdown slate?
I'm going to have 2 lineups. And I'm changing them around, so I'm not set on them. I'm probably my final lineup won't be set until after the game, after our show, and I'm gonna get on our Discord for our subs, and I'll tell them that I'm not gonna tell them my lineup, but I'll tell them like how many of each team and what the captain is. But I will tell you this: my first thought is there's 2 guys that are gonna shit ton of ownership. It's Kamara and Travis Kelce. Of the 2, I'm more likely to fade Kelce because he's old and he sucks. That's the main reason I'm fading him. The other thought is, in the Kamara, like I don't know. I think I'm gonna have one lineup with him and one without him. Is my guess. I'm not sure yet. So that's my first thought. Is Kelce's gonna get a shit ton of ownership. People are probably gonna try to play the cheapy that goes well. I don't love that game. I don't have an opinion on that game because I don't want to be like, yes, Justin Watson's the man. No, Juju. These guys all suck. Mahomes is good. But I thought is also this could just be a Chiefs defensive beatdown. And how do we construct a lineup for a Chiefs defensive beatdown that doesn't leave a lot of salary on the table? So I'm going to try to do kind of a shootout lineup and then kind of a Chiefs defensive beatdown lineup. I haven't quite decided who's going to be in those two lineups, but I think in general, having Xavier Worthy over Kelsey is going to be a theme of mine because they're similarly priced, but Kelsey's going to get more ownership. He seems safer with all the targets and blah, blah, blah. Worthy is probably going to be the wide receiver one for the rest of the season just because all the other ones got injured.
Yep, I think I agree on all points. The one thing I will say is I think I'm also pretty confident about a Kamara fade. Kansas City, the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data is extremely, extremely anti-playing running backs against Kansas City. They're negative 38% production allowed to opposing running backs. That's easily the best in the NFL. Second best coming into this week was Pittsburgh at negative 27%. So negative 38% is a big, big negative number to be looking at. Now, Kamara is maybe a little bit more matchup independent than most running backs because one of the reasons why Kansas City.
They definitely overestimate. They're like, oh, if they get behind Kamara's going to get like 20 targets, and that's just not the case.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. I was going to say something similar in the sense that like he's a little bit less matchup dependent than most because when the game script gets bad, he's still in the field, he's still catching balls. But it also would be a mistake to say, oh, the rushing matchup doesn't matter for Kamara. Much more of his overall production this year has come on the ground than what we have seen in the past, particularly on the ground scoring touchdowns. And I just don't know if he's going to be able to get in the end zone in that way tonight. And so one thing that I'm heavily considering, and I want your take on here, TwoGun, is we often talk about having rules where like we don't want a quarterback and his kicker in the same lineup because we want those touchdowns. I feel pretty strongly that you can make the same case here about Kamara and the New Orleans kicker. What do you think?
I feel like you don't want to have Kamara with Derek Carr as much, is where I'm at. I think people way overestimate Kamara's receiving abilities. And if you're doing a Kansas City beat, I can tell you I'm going to have a Kansas City beatdown set. I'm not going to have Alvin Kamara in that one. Because the idea is they're going to have to throw the ball to catch up, and Kamara's just not going to get as many targets as people think he's going to get. They're going to be throwing the ball downfield to Olave or Shaheed or whatever. So I think I just think that Kamara does poorly in they're airing it out situation. He does better in a close game. He does better or a game where the Saints are winning. But in terms of what were you saying? You don't pair him with the kicker?
With the kicker, yeah.
I don't feel that as much because I just feel like kicker is like I wouldn't pair their kicker with Derek Carr.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really. Kickers people way over rostering kickers in general. Okay, because what happened was there was a few games at the beginning of this year, and these kickers were kicking 58-yard field goals. So I get it, but it's just a kicker is just so the kicker is for a defensive, boring-ass game. And you don't use kickers when you're wanting a high-scoring matchup. I don't know. Yeah. I have to tell the right story is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I think the other thing with kickers is I like using kickers when I expect a team's going to be able to move the ball, but they're going to have trouble getting into the end zone. And sometimes that's like a little bit clearer than others. I don't have a strong take on that in this one, but I think my thought there with Kamara is because he's more touchdown dependent than he's been in the past. If I'm fading him, then I like the idea of New Orleans gets to the red zone but can't actually get the ball into the end zone. They just doesn't score that way. The other thing you can do is you can just hope that the touchdowns come through the air from Derek Carr to somebody other than Kamara, which is I think is a totally fine way to do it. And I do agree with you. If I have Kamara, I don't want Carr. If I have Carr, I don't want Kamara because the same idea here, right? Like a lot of people are going to be really okay playing them together. I think more so than they should. Again, because Kamara has been less receiving dependent this year. He's been much more dependent on his ground production, but also because when Carr is at his best, it's when he's able to throw the ball downfield. if he's not throwing the ball downfield, if he's throwing to Kamara, it means he's being forced to check it down more than he wants to do. So I do very much agree with that one. I also agree with the inverse correlation between Xavier Worthy and Travis Kelce. So I think that you and I are on very much the same page tonight overall. One more question for you. Do you have a preference between Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed?
I'm going to go with Chris Olave if I can afford him. That's just not going to always be the case.
Yeah. I think when you factor in price, I definitely prefer Shaheed. And again, this is largely because of the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against numbers. Negative 28% for Kansas City against wide receiver ones, plus 9% to wide receiver twos. Rashid Shaheed, as good as he's been this year, clearly still the number 2 behind Chris Olave. So I have yet to be.
Difference?
Say that again?
But it's just a $2,000 difference is the thing. I don't know if that's another discount.
Yeah. That's a good point. But I mean, I've yet to be really penalized this entire season, really, not just on the island games, but main slate as well, for following this DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data. Like it's so much better than traditional fantasy points against data. It's so much better than traditional, yards allowed data or anything like that. This is far more predictive. And the way that I like to use it is seeing the intent of a defense come through. So like in Kansas City's case, we're going to talk about this a lot more in a second, but they have been the best matchup by far for opposing tight ends at plus 91%. So when I see plus 91% for tight ends, when I see plus 9% for wide receiver twos, and then a really big negative 28% for wide receiver ones, I get the inkling that Kansas City is really making an effort to take away the number 1 wide receiver. Now, it can just be because they have some really good cornerbacks and they can just let those corners go to work. But I think it's also they are kind of following, maybe a little bit of what Bill Belichick has always done, which is make the quarterback do something other than the thing that he wants to do the most. And the thing that he wants to do the most is get the ball to his number 1 wide receiver. So I think we will continue to see this trend hold. And I kind of love this because we have a very strong signal in this data against Alvin Kamara and against Chris Olave, which means we can go to whoever we want on New Orleans other than that and be contrarian just through who we're fading.
Yeah, I just, that's why I loved DK Metcalf yesterday, and look where it got me. So I'm with you more if it was like 10,000 and 6,000 for prices, but 10,000 and 8,000, it's not a pick 'em, but a little too close for me to be wanting to really go down to Shaheed. I guess the other thing you could say is what's the ownership going to look at, though?
Yeah.
We're going to be way more on Shaheed on Olave than Shaheed because of that.
I don't think they will. I think it's going to be really close, at least in flex. I think Olave could separate from Shaheed in captain ownership. But in flex ownership, I think they're going to be very close to one another. And I think part of that is kind of getting to my point, which is like we can look at this sometimes as what is the actual price difference? Okay, it's $2,000. It's not always what's the number that's different. It's what does it change in your lineup, right? If it's going from Kareem Hunt to Travis Kelce, if you really like Kelce, maybe that's worth it. If you're going from, 2 guys on Kansas City that you don't feel any different about, then by all means, maybe you go to the higher price Olave. So it's more than just the raw amount of price difference between them. It's about what that price difference actually gets me.
Yeah, and this is just kind of a weird game because you just don't have that many high-priced guys, and one of the higher-priced guys is freaking Kareem Hunt.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, very true. We should talk Kareem Hunt as well, but real quick, if you guys are in here in the YouTube chat, continue to ask questions. We always love when you do so. Like the show as well, and please subscribe to FTN too. The FTN Network YouTube channel. That way, you guys know exactly what time we're going live every single time on Mondays and Thursdays. You don't have to drop into the chat and ask, although it's always pretty much going to be 5:30 Eastern as long as we can make that time work. But drop a like if you can. And again, ask questions. In the meantime, before we talk Kareem Hunt, let's kind of go to the guy we sort of buried the lead here because we are both really high on a somewhat contrarian super cheap New Orleans Saint Jawan Johnson. I kind of just explained it to a large degree. Kansas City allowing 91% more production than average to opposing tight ends. That is an absolutely enormous number. We came into the week, Washington, we were talking about how great of a matchup they've been for wide receiver ones. They were at plus 77%. Now, Amari Cooper wasn't totally able to take advantage of that because his quarterback is the worst quarterback in the NFL right now, Deshaun Watson. But I really like this spot for Jawan Johnson. We saw his snap share go up to 67% last week once Taysom Hill got hurt. Ended up with a higher snap share than Foster Moreau even. And he only was outsnapped by Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, and Rashid Shaheed. So I think he will be a much bigger part of tonight's game plan than what we have seen from him so far this year. We know historically he's a guy who scores a lot of touchdowns. I love the play, and it sounds like you do too.
Yeah, he's just so cheap. Like I said, I'm only going to have 2 lineups. He's going to be in at least one of them, but I think it's probably just going to be one of them. Not because I only like him that much. It's just because it's like you said. He does well in your. I feel like he does well with Derek Carr if he's paired with Derek Carr. He doesn't do so well in this is a beatdown game. They're not airing it out to him where he's like if the Saints are behind and they're just getting their ass kicked. They're not airing it out to Jawan Johnson not getting 10 targets. I mean, he might. It's probably going to Olave and Shaheed and whatever, or they're just not getting that much.
I'll push back a little bit there that I think he works really well in a New Orleans beatdown too, because in a New Orleans beatdown, they're scoring touchdowns. And that's Jawan Johnson's path. It's not that he gets 10 targets. It's that he gets 5.
He's beating the Saints down is what I meant.
Got it. Yes, I agree with that completely.
No, I think he does well. I mean, I'm respecting the 5.5 point spread and the fact it's funny. I took the Saints in all those circuit contests and stuff. So, but I feel like everyone's taking that. I'm like almost like maybe I need to respect the spread a little bit more. And I'm gonna have the Chiefs being down the Saints, and I probably won't have Jawan Johnson in that. And then I'm gonna have more of a balanced game. And I'm definitely gonna have Jawan Johnson in that one. I don't know if I'm having him as captain, but I'm definitely gonna have him in the lineup. It just depends on how it works. Because, I think he's going to get targets, and he might get a touchdown. His ceiling is not super, super high, but he's definitely the best value play. So he's a much better value play than the Justin Watsons of the world.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a question of, when I'm making my lineup, and even if I have a Chiefs beatdown, do I rather have Juju Smith-Schuster in there, or do I put in Jawan Johnson? And I'm starting to talk myself into just putting in Jawan Johnson, to be honest. Because I think people are – because, Juju Smith-Schuster and all these Justin Watsons, no matter what, their peak is 10 points.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of even going back to, I think I'm just going to Jawan Johnson. If I'm going to have Jawan Johnson probably in both lineups and definitely in place as a leverage off of this cheap chalk. I don't know if call it chalk, but filler.
No, I think you can call it chalk. I think we have. So, for example, we have I think Watson and Juju between 20 and 30% flex ownership, which means either one of them could easily get to 40, maybe even 50 in the flex, particularly if the field ends up with a strong preference for one over the other. And I think it would be more likely that Juju is the popular one, with people saying, oh, what if Juju has some of the Rashee Rice role? Which I don't expect to happen. And even if it does happen.
He got cut from the Patriots.
Yeah.
He got cut. Look, I'm the biggest Juju Smith-Schuster apologist there is out there, okay? I drafted him way too much in best ball, not this past year, but the year before that. Mm-hmm. And this year I even had him in a couple, and I like old guys, but he got cut from the fucking Patriots, man.
Yeah.
Patriots.
Yeah. Yep. Agree completely. So I think
he's wide open. He lucked into being wide open somehow. Dude's going to be running wind sprints. I like this guy.
He could luck into being wide open again, but I think there's also just a good chance that like the further into the season we go, I think the more likely we are to see some really purposeful designed plays for Xavier Worthy and just a general emphasis on finding ways to get him open. He's not the same type of route runner that Rashee Rice is. So I think they have to do more things to make him the primary target. And of course they want to get him the ball. He has absolutely dynamic, explosive speed and just, game-breaking ability in that way. Good question here. Can we talk through a New Orleans victory and what that looks like from a showdown build perspective? TwoGun, I know that you don't have a Saints lineup or a Saints dominant lineup kind of in your plans for tonight. So I'll give this one a try first, where I think the first thing that I'm going to say is even in a Saints blowout win, not necessarily blowout, just a Saints controlled game where you have at least 4 Saints in your lineup, I think that a Kamara fade still makes some sense. Again, because we have such a bad rushing matchup for them, Kansas City's also 5th in adjusted line yards allowed. You can very easily see kind of a game script where they are just throwing the ball a lot. Maybe they abandon the run early on, but Derek Carr is finding some success through the air, balancing it between Olave, Shaheed, Jawan Johnson, hopefully, and you have a very clear path that way. Now, in that type of game script, like Kamara's still going to get plenty of touches, but if the touchdowns go elsewhere and the yardage doesn't stack up for Kamara, because of his price, he can still help, Derek Carr get there if he catches a few balls and gets, 30 receiving yards, something like that. But he's not going to end up anywhere close to the optimal lineup. So just because you're going to New Orleans beatdown type of lineup doesn't mean you need Kamara. I think, in fact, I still don't want him because I like the predictability that comes by following this DVOA data and just saying New Orleans is probably going to have to throw the ball to move the ball, almost in a sense that like the easiest path for New Orleans to actually outperform their expectations today and win is for them to say, we don't have a path to success on the ground in this matchup. Let's not even try it. Let's put the ball in Derek Carr's hands and see what he can do. He's been a pretty effective quarterback this year.
I think you got to differentiate between a New Orleans beatdown, like New Orleans killing the Saints, versus New Orleans winning. New Orleans killing the Saints, they get like a 14-point lead and they hold it. Yeah, sure, Alvin Kamara captain's probably the way to go. I also think that's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's happening. I have so many Saints futures. I win like $300-400 grand if they win damn. They win all. So believe me, I want the Saints, and I had them in those contests. And I'm not building for that. I think I'm gonna have Kamara in 0 of my lineups. I'm actually leaning towards fading him more than I'm fading Kelsey, because I just think there's 3 fades we got going on, okay? And you can't always fade everything in all of your lineups. I'm doing 2 lineups. So the more lineups we have, you're not going to fade every single lineup, right? So there's 3 fades we got. And often Showdown is a game about fades. Sometimes there's guys you like, Jawan Johnson, and then there's the fades. So the guy I like, really just Jawan Johnson. That's it. Everyone else, who cares? Jawan Johnson, like, fades. Kelsey, overloved, because who else are you going to throw to? Well, Worthy. I like Worthy. Second fade, cheap wide receiver chalk. They all suck. All the Chiefs cheap guys suck. They all suck. The third one is Kamara, and he's expensive. He's the most expensive by far. He's the most expensive player. He's more expensive than Mahomes. And people are just going to use him because he's going to get he's going to get at least 15, 20 points. He can get 6 points easily, especially in the Chiefs beatdown. So,
yep.
If you're building for a Saints win, then you're probably going to want a 3-3, maybe a 4-2 of some sort, but generally a 3-3. And I don't see any reason you need to have Kamara in there.
Yeah.
But so you really think the Saints win by 3 touchdowns? Definitely Kamara captain. It's not happening.
We have a couple comments that I want to get to. Really helpful comments, by the way. So appreciate it, Jake and Chris as well coming up. Jake brings up the fact Kamara had 9 targets last week. Interestingly, I think this perfectly makes our point. Derek Carr in that game, 239 yards on 36 attempts, 9.1 fantasy points. When Carr is throwing to Kamara, it's because he's not able to get the ball downfield where he wants the ball to go. So if Kamara is getting those targets, it's not going to be the type of game that they want. Obviously, they lost that one to Atlanta. They didn't even have the ball much. Atlanta obviously threw kind of all over the place against them. So, like I said, it kind of makes that point for us in a lot of ways. And then the other thing that I would say, Chris asks, can we play Olave and Shaheed in the same lineup? I'm going to say yes, you can. And then I'm also going to bring up the fact that TwoGun, you were mentioning earlier the optimal captain data that we have. It was in my article. Derek Carr didn't even make the top 10 in optimal captain rate, under 1.4% in our simulations, in large part because when he does well, it's throwing the ball downfield to one of two guys, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed. So when he does really well, it's so much more likely that one of those two guys, either Olave or Shaheed, is the optimal captain instead of Carr. So question number one is, do you think that's going to be the case again tonight? And then question number two is, does Juwan Johnson change anything? Because let's say, for example, that Carr throws for 300 yards. Shaheed has a lot of it. Olave has a lot of it. But Juwan Johnson catches 2 touchdowns. Does that make it so that Carr is actually a better captain tonight than our simulations are showing?
I had Derek Carr as the captain at first, thinking maybe I don't know. I generally don't love QB as a captain unless it has some rushing ability. Like he might get a rushing touchdown with Derek Carr. That's like 0% chance.
Yeah.
I think Taysom Hill being out also kind of helps all of those guys a little bit. I think it helps actually Kamara the least because people overthink that. But I don't know. I just don't think – there's probably going to be one wide receiver that separates. So it probably makes more sense to just put Olave as captain and then Derek Carr and then Shaheed.
Yeah.
Or whatever. I just don't really think you want to – I think you probably should – it's probably going to be better if you just guess which one.
Yeah, I think that's how I'm leaning too. Is like as much as I like Juwan Johnson tonight, I'm thinking he makes more sense just as a flex option, go to either Olave or Shaheed as the captain, since I do want to be a little bit heavier on the New Orleans side.
Well, if you put Juwan Johnson as your captain, then you have so much sound. It's a different type of build.
Yeah, and that's kind of what is keeping me off of that, because when I do that, it's like if I'm not using Kamara and I'm not using Travis Kelce and I feel strongly about those fades, I don't have enough salary to make anything make sense.
You're probably going to want to use one of those guys. Is what I'm trying to say. That's why I say we have all these fades, but you don't fade the fades in every single lineup. Like there's 3 fades. A lineup can have all 3 fades, or it can have just 2 of the fades. That's why you just what's the lesson from that Tucker Kraft chalk? It's not even that Tucker Kraft was a good play. I don't think he was a good play. But sometimes it's okay to not have every single one of your fades. Like it's okay to have one of them in your lineup, especially if you play multiple lineups.
Yep.
You're a single lineup guy. I don't know why. I mean, and you're not even married. So, like, I understand all the married guys out there, single lineups, they're just, like, trained to the core. Be like, one. Just one, man. Just one. But you're not married, right? So, I don't really know what your excuse is, Alex. I don't know what your excuse is.
It's not an excuse. I have tried multiple lineups so many times throughout the last, let's say, like 3, 4, 5 years. And every single time, there I am 4 months later saying, I think I do better when I just build one lineup. And then I go back to single entry, and then all of a sudden the big wins come again. And so for whatever reason, I just do better when I build one lineup. And I think it's a good lesson for anyone out there watching too, is just like take some time to experiment with your process. Maybe do 3 lineups 1 week, 1 the next, 20 the next, whatever, and see what number 1 you feel most comfortable with, but also look back on your lineups and evaluate them. If you look back on 20 lineups that you built and you say, all 20 of these are really good lineups and I would have been happy with any of them as my single entry lineup, then great, you're doing a good job. What I found was when I built even 3 lineups, 5 lineups, 7, 10, something like that, I would look at them and you say, I'm making more mistakes within these lineups than I would ever make if I had only built one. And so that for me, like that's what it was about. And so now I just play one lineup, and some weeks it feels a little bit silly, but I, at this point, know very convincingly in my own data, my own play, I'm just better when I only build one.
I would say you're definitely right. If you build too many lineups, the more lineups you build, the more mistakes you're going to make. I feel like there's a difference between Showdown and main slate. For Showdown, it's really all the different ideas I have.
Mhm.
But I'm generally capped out around 4. I'm generally in the 2 to 4 range is where I'm at. I have 2 tonight, and I think I'm good. And main slate, I think I'm closer to 10 to 20. Once I get above 20, mistakes get to be made. But I've had some of my biggest wins when I did those 50 lineups for, not as much money on each one. Like if I do 50 versus 20, I'm not doing 2.5 times as much money. Okay, I'm just doing less money per lineup. But yeah, I think it depends on the slate. It depends on the person. But some people think I'm like this 150 type guy. I'm generally more of a 10 to 20. But going back to what we're saying is, if you're one lineup guy, then yes, I understand you want to include all of your fades. But once you hit even 2 lineups, if you have 3 fades like I have, I'm telling you right off the bat, I'm going to have Travis Kelce, Alvin Kamara, or a cheat sheet in at least one of my lineups. Right now, it's looking like Kelce, but it's just hard to you just don't make it a religion once you get more than one lineup to have all of your fades, because you're trying to differentiate your 2 lineups, and you kind of proven your point already.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
yep, I love all of that, and I also agree with the one guy you singled out. I think of all of the fades that we've discussed, Kelce is the one I'm most likely to play, in large part because I don't feel as strongly about some of the other Kansas City guys. I think one path where I would definitely still fade Kelce is if I decide to go Worthy as my captain and just hope that he hits on a big play as well as gets a bunch of targets, which is another thing. I think a lot of people, when they think about a player like Xavier Worthy, they're saying in order to have the big play, he needs to have the 50-yard air yard target where he takes it to the house, and maybe New Orleans just doesn't get beat over the top all that often, so I don't expect it to happen. It's not always the case. Sometimes a player like Worthy can have a big play because he catches a 7-yard slant and just outruns everybody. Think of the Jamar Chase 70-yard touchdown in yesterday's game against Baltimore. It wasn't on a bomb. He had the 41-yard touchdown on a bomb down the right side, but the 70-yard touchdown was a screen pass that he broke to the house. That's the kind of explosive play that Worthy could have, and the more targets he gets, the more likely he is to break one of those for a touchdown. So I do like the idea of Worthy as a captain a little bit.
I'm going to make this even simpler. Worthy is the only player that doesn't completely suck as a skill player, right? I mean, basically, the Chiefs are Mahomes, and Mahomes is the best, and Mahomes is the GOAT. And that's why they're the favorite, and that's why they're probably going to win the game, because Mahomes. After Mahomes, if you took Mahomes and put in random other quarterback, they're definitely underdogs in this game, because all the other guys suck. They are using guys cut from every other team in the NFL at this point. Yep. Except for Worthy. He's and Kelce, I understand, is not cuttable, but he's not Travis Kelce from 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. But he at least is a decent player. He's at least a decent tight end. He would not get cut by a team in the NFL. Whereas every single other guy is was literally cut from another team. That is all you need to know about these Chiefs skill players. 2 of them were not cut. And one of them is actually maybe decent good at this point. That's all there is to it.
Yep, I agree. All right, it's time to talk some pick six. If you have any more Showdown questions, you can drop them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll see you in Discord after the show to answer more questions. I am going to go ahead and try to bring up the pick six here. It seems like my internet's holding up a little bit better than I expected. So I'll tell you what, a lot of the conversation we've just had about this slate from a Showdown perspective is the exact same way that I'm going to approach it here on pick six. My first pick that I'm going to is Alvin Kamara, less than 65.5 rushing yards. How do you feel about that one?
Yeah, definitely. You know what? Something I need to do that I said I was going to do for the show, and I didn't do it because I have 80,000 things I'm dealing with right now, is I was going to look, and I can do it right now, is look at pick six from last night. Because I messed up pick six from last night. Mm-hmm. There was an obvious play, and that was unders. And I think that's the key. In these island games, people click over even more so because if there's a guy that you think you might want to click under on, then his number is generally so much lower than people think because people's perception of offense is just so skewed that they're like, oh, well, Justin Fields 150 yards. I mean, he threw 300 yards last game, of course. Like, it's an obvious over. And I think that's just how people are going to be looking at most of these numbers today. My computer, of course, being slow. I'm trying to bring up last night as an example. I just think people are going to be clicking not just Kamara over, because the thing about Kamara's over on the rush and reception, which is one thing you think they'd like, that's 101 yards. That's actually kind of a big number. Yeah. So that might be a little intimidating. What's far less intimidating, maybe it's the 65.5 rushing yards, but it's definitely Kelsey's receiving total. I bet you Kamara's receiving total gets a lot of love because that's not intimidating. 34.5 yards just doesn't seem like that much. So I think those are going to be the things that are the bigger fades, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's a great call.
Now, rushing yards might just be a better fade because of our DVOA data.
Yeah.
And you just hope it fails too.
Yeah, it's the DVOA data that makes me really confident in that rushing yards lower than or less than selection. I think you mentioned kind of just this idea of psychology at play where people see a number over 100 yards for Kamara, the rushing plus receiving, and that's a little bit intimidating. A number that's not going to be intimidating is Chris Olave, 58.5. So I think that's going to be another potentially popular one. And I think
all going to be popular. I think everyone's clicking the overs.
Yeah, 47.5 for Shaheed, I think is another one. 58.5 for Kelsey might be popular. But although I kind of have the inclination that people will go to 5.5 receptions for Kelsey instead and just hope that he continues to catch these short ones. They've given him some screens. I think 3.5 for Shaheed will be really popular. He's done quite well. But I think another thing that kind of helps figure out where people are going to go, you can click on a player and see what they have done recently. Olave has gone over 80 yards in 3 consecutive games. People are going to see that and see his number at just 58.5, and that's just going to be a really popular one for people. So I also like the idea of going less on Olave. And then one of our favorite guys tonight, Juwan Johnson. If Olave's not getting the receiving yards and Kamara's not getting the rushing yards, I think going Juwan Johnson more on his receiving yards makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, or you could just not click on him. I think it's a little bit of what are you waiting for and what are you clicking on.
Yeah,
and it's a little bit different. Is what I'm trying to get at. Like for example, how do you exactly, if you take Kamara's rushing under, where are you going to go? Are you going to go for attempts over? Are you going to go receptions over? Are you just not doing anything? Are you going with some like Kareem Hunt over rushing yards? Like, how do you build a story around that? It's always easier to correlate with passing and receiving yards. It's a little bit less so with rushing yards, but it's still very possible.
Yeah. Speaking of, I think another one that I like a lot to pair with this Kamara less than is you're telling a story. You're saying New Orleans not only can't run the ball well, but they know that they can't run the ball well, which means they just have a higher pass rate over expectation than we're accustomed to seeing. So I think Kamara less rushing yards works really well with either completions or passing attempts. I just think more than 31.5 passing attempts for Derek Carr makes a lot of sense. Now, if you're doing something like this and going to the receiving yards and just saying, I think Olave is going to be popular, so I'm going to go less on 58.5 receiving yards. That's not the way you want to play this because now you have two things that really don't correlate well with one another. So kind of pick and choose. To your point, just like you can build multiple lineups in Showdown, you can also build multiple lineups here in Pick 6. One will tell the story of, maybe the New Orleans offense just as a whole struggling, where it's Olave is going under, Kamara's going under, all these guys are having trouble. And then the next one is, okay, what happens if New Orleans just throws the ball a ton and they don't even try to run the ball? So tell different stories and build different Pick 6 lineups that way too.
Yeah.
And by the way, on Pick 6, I am much more willing to build many different lineups too.
Remember that. But and this Kamara 5.5 receptions, that to me it's definitely an underclick, or less click. But that goes best with probably clicking less on his completions. And I don't know where you want to go from there. I think it's just all over the place. I just think something to keep in mind is I think despite the total only being 43.5, people are going to really want to click on the mores. I don't see anything that people want to click less on because anything that's remotely they want to click less on is kind of like discounted to the point in their brains that it doesn't look so bad. Like all these cheap Chiefs, some of them are not going to catch a pass, or like they'll catch one pass for like 10 yards.
I was looking through a lot of the different pick six entries that people have been putting in, and you made the point I think a week ago or so, which is looking through everything, that you thought it was something like 60-40 or 70-30 more to less than most of the time. And I think it might be even higher on touchdowns. I think when people go to touchdowns, like they're almost exclusively going to touchdowns to pick somebody actually scoring, and very rarely are they picking less than 0.5 touchdowns. So I think that's another way you could do it here. And a really well correlated type of play would be, let's say you're going Travis Kelce less than 0.5 plus 0.5 touchdowns. And then you go and you say, okay, now is one of the rare times where I'll take a more on kicking points, because here you're saying, what if Kansas City just can't get into the end zone, right? It's not just the touchdown goes elsewhere. The touchdown might not even come. So I think this is another type of just well correlated thing that you can kind of talk through and play, mix it in with some other entries.
Right. You could also do, it goes well with Mahomes less than 1.5 passing TDs as well.
Yep. 100%.
People, I feel like they do kicking points the wrong way. They view it as, remember, the max you get is 3. It's kicking points. It's not kicking fantasy points.
Yep.
So people generally click over way too much on the kickers.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I think you could do with the Saints is if you want to do groupie up, less and 6.5 points, and basically doing the Chiefs like scoring a lot, because it's like they're gonna have to catch up.
Yeah,
is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, you could also, there's so many different ways you can do this. And I think this is why Pick Six is so fun, is because you can tell so many different stories, and you can use some chalky picks in a way that others aren't going to. So we've talked, like you just said, kicking points, or people typically go to those and click way more often than they should. So one way you can leverage that is Kelce, Hunt, each of these guys, maybe they'll be a little bit overplayed for their touchdowns, but you could go more on both of these guys. And then say, if they're both scoring, like we don't expect Kansas City to get that much offense tonight, which means if they score 2 touchdowns, chances are they're not settling for that many field goals, probably max of 1. Now you go less on Butker. And again, you're telling a very clear story, and you kind of only have to be right about one thing here.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. By the way, I had a really nice day on Pick Six yesterday. I'm almost curious to hear your thoughts on this. I think it was 3 6 for 6 and a couple other 5 for 6. And I just went to some pretty chalky stacks. Stacks where I didn't just feel good about the offense as a whole and the passing yards going more than for the quarterback, but also I was very confident about where those passing yards would go to. So, for example, I hit on a Jacksonville stack that had Christian Kirk and Brian Thomas Jr., and I hit on a Los Angeles stack that had Stafford with Tutu Atwell and Whittington. The payouts were only 11x because obviously a lot of offenses did quite well. So there were more 6 for 6 than usual. But man, it felt really simple. And so I guess my question to you is, number one, on these main slates, when the name of the game is just to correlate, are you trying to go to the chalky offenses that just project the best? Or are you almost going away from them? Because I was trying to think this through. I feel like if you're not going to play the chalkiest stacks, you probably want to just take the opposite side. And so, like, if you weren't going to go Lawrence, Thomas, and Kirk, you could flip it and say, what if they all go under? What if it's just a really bad game through the air? Maybe, Trevor Lawrence gets hurt in the first quarter and now the backup quarterback can't do anything. So reason being, if payouts are going to be fairly high anyway, you might as well play the chalk. And if you want to get some really good payouts, then you want to be almost actively choosing against the chalk.
Yeah, I think we're getting to that point already on the main slate.
Yeah.
In general, Pick Six, like I keep doing analysis of It's very easy to say on their main slate, this is a bad lineup or this is a good lineup based on correlation. It's a little bit harder with the island games, right? Because everything is kind of correlated with that. Like there's some things that are definitely a bad idea. If everyone they just click more everything randomly, and that's bad. Especially not. But it's very easy to tell if this is a good lineup or bad lineup on the main slate. And I'm noticing there's definitely more good lineups, still like kind of 50-50. But it's not like 80-20 bad to good. Yeah. But people are definitely clicking on mores. And there's just a huge difference if you're getting paid 30-1 or you're getting paid 11-1.
Yeah.
Or even if you're getting paid 20-1, it's twice as much.
Yeah. I think this is the really cool thing about Pick Six too, because in the past, like I've been a big Prize Picks player and underdog player for the last, like, let's say year and a half or so, and had a ton of success on those platforms. And what I would find is, Prize Picks, let's say, would catch up to what I was doing. So for a while I was stacking, hits plus runs plus RBIs in baseball, just a whole team doing that against the opposing pitcher. And I was cleaning up doing that. And then they thought, okay, you know what? We can't have stacks going against the same pitcher. So they got rid of that. And then it was still stacking. And I would do, a 3-man stack on 2 different teams. And then they caught on to that. And so little by little, the game got worse. It didn't just get different. It got worse. On Pick Six, the game isn't going to get worse. It's just going to get different. The more people start to catch on and stack, the more we just change our strategy and start picking against those stacks, things of that nature. So I think that's, we're talking a lot about what makes Pick Six great. To me, that might be number one. It's if the game cannot possibly get worse, it can just get different.
It can get worse. Let's keep things in mind. It can get worse. It can definitely get harder.
It can get harder, but it just means we have to change.
I mean, I'm still playing DFS. I started playing DFS in 2012, okay? I say I started playing professionally in 2013. I made, I don't know, like a couple $100,000 in 2013 so far. I've been doing this a long goddamn time. I mean, I've made more money the past 5 years than I did the first 5 years. I think that says something.
Yeah,
it gets different. It gets different before it gets unbeatable.
You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of a conversation that we've had a bunch, even dating back to last year, about how people often assume that high stakes in traditional DFS and DraftKings is harder. And you and I both take the position that it might, like, the competition is better, but the competition is also more predictable. And I think the same thing can be said about Pick Six. As the field gets sharper, the field is also going to get more predictable. And we're going to know what people are choosing more than what we know right now. So, like, think of the conversation that we've had tonight about this game. We don't have a Devin Singletary type pick tonight that we know that we can leverage because we're not really sure where the field is going, what they're going to be playing. The sharper the field becomes, yes, the better their entries become, but also the more predictable their entries become. And that means that we have an easier time leveraging them. So I'm going to stand by it. The game can change, but it can't really get worse. It just gets different.
Yeah, and like, I just don't have the data yet for my own personal play. It's so early. Yep. And on these main slates, I mean, let's face it, the main slate has not gone my way this year. It just hasn't. And even when we're right, like Jamar Chase yesterday, if the rest of it is high scoring, that sucks for me on the main slate. I don't do well when the Millie Maker winner is 220 plus. Okay, I just don't do well. That's just not the TwoGun vibes. And it's going to trickle down to Pick Six as well, okay? So when the main winner is like a 180 or 190, I'll probably have a good Pick Six day as well. And I'm going to learn how to do stuff differently. But let me go to my Pick Six because I don't know why I can't download it. It's my computer's fault. But I can see what the I don't want to have to reboot my computer. But last night the Pick Six multiplier on 6 out of 6 was 67.6. 67.6. Less than 1% of people got 6 out of 6. You know why? Because every damn person, even my stupid self, did overs on Justin Fields. Come on, man. He can't throw the ball. Like, all I had to do is click under on that dude.
Fields, Lamb.
I would have gone there somehow. I would have gone there eventually if I did that or enough of them. I don't need 100 lineups of that to get there.
Yeah. Fields, Lamb, and Pickens. It was pretty much those three because those three didn't get there. The multiplier was huge, which tonight that might be Olave, Kelsey, and Kamara, something like that. So,
yeah, and like you just have to find a few combos.
Mhm.
With pick six, I know you're a single entry guy. It's even more so. Like divide it as many as possible. It gives you no advantage. Like you're not entering contests where it's like $30. Do I enter two $30 contests for $160? It doesn't work like that. They basically take your entry and they divide it into $1 contests across the field. So take the time, put it in multiple ones. I understand it's not as easy to sweat that way, but you have to decide: do you care more about money or do you care more about enjoyment? I obviously care more about money. I killed the enjoyment of my life.
I also think you can flip that a little bit and you can say the enjoyment can come just as much from knowing that you're building really nice lineups that tell a clear story, lineups that have a lot of expected value, and find more enjoyment from that process in and of itself than just being able to follow what they're doing during the game and sweating it out. And honestly, it's not that hard to sweat even if you have multiple different lineups, because a lot of the time, like
by the fourth quarter, you'll know what you're rooting for by the fourth quarter.
Exactly. If you have, let's say you have 5 different.
Clear if you take both sides, and that's the thing is like you don't have to play the game every single which of an angle you think of. Yeah. Like you can have some themes where if Kamara rushes for 100 yards, you're just screwed, and most of them are going to lose, and that's just you're going to have to be cool with that. You don't have to take every single one.
Yeah. If you have, let's say, 5 different pick six lineups and they're all telling different stories, you can have some similar picks, right? Like you could have Kamara less than 65.5 rushing yards in 4 out of the 5 or even 5 out of the 5. But you can still tell different stories throughout the rest of it. Chances are in the first quarter, one of them is going to be done. You don't have to root for that one anymore. Chances are in the second quarter, you're going to lose 2 more. And now by the time the third quarter comes around, there are only 2 that you're rooting for remaining, things like that. So it doesn't really take the enjoyment out of it. You can run multiple pick six lineups and really still get a lot out of it. And if they're all pick six lineups and not pick 2 or pick 3, pick 4, you only need one of them to hit to have a really good night.
And I stress it's probably a good idea to have some pick 4, pick 5 in there as well, because it just sucks. Like I've gotten some times where like I get a bunch of 5 out of 6 and just like, ugh.
Well, I think more than just like it can be frustrating if you're trying to get 6 for 6. Sometimes if you're telling a story about what happens in the game, the story is only 4 picks long. You'd be forcing in something else that doesn't fit the narrative that you're going with quite as well. And so that's when I limit it to 4. I've even done 2 picks at times, like in that Singletary game when I was fading Singletary. I felt so good about that. And I knew that one of the easiest ways that was going to come to fruition was that Dallas was going to have the ball more. And so Dowdle, more rushing yards, Singletary, less rushing yards. Just 2 picks. It hit, and it did quite well.
Yeah. It's not always about telling every story. Sometimes you just have to tell one story. You know what I'm saying? Let's just say
it can be a simple story.
Yeah.
And then others can be really deep and more extreme, and that's when you go to the 6 pick.
Yeah. So.
All right. Anything else before we head out?
No, not really. If you haven't tried Pick 6 yet, make sure you use our code, because if you want us to keep doing this, talking about Pick 6, they need to know that people are playing Pick 6 because of us. Otherwise, we're just going to shut up about Pick 6, and you're not going to get any more tips from us, and that's that. Or you're going to have to pay a lot of money for it. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah. One final thing that I'll say, shout out to 2 of our best fantasy analysts, Tyler Lochner and Vlad Settler, this weekend. Both had really, really solid tournament-winning DFS finishes. Neither of them play a lot of DFS. Neither of them really love DFS the way that we do, but they love fantasy football and knew this year these GPP scores that are helping all of us, even the most hardcore DFS players, they're just simplifying the game. So even if you don't view yourself as much of a DFS player, even if you haven't tried it much, the GPP score simplified in a way that just help people who enjoy football will be able to have success with these GPP scores in DFS. So please try them out. And with that being said, once again, give the show a like, give the FTN Network YouTube channel a subscribe, just smash that subscribe button, and we will catch you next time, Thursday, 5:30 Eastern for Thursday Night Football. Catch you next time.